Yeah, so that is awesome. That is really cool. He's got a like arcade, 8-bit arcade quality style Star Wars game on his shirt, which is cool. Although I swear the Y-wings look like the Enterprise.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. So, all right. Really quickly, we're gonna go around the room. I want to hear who your favorite Street Fighter character is. Please don't hem and haw. Please don't give me some crap about, well, it depends on the game or what mood I'm in or if it's Tuesday or not. Just give me your favorite Street Fighter character, okay?
Currently C-Vipe.
Who?
Crimson Viper.
There we are.
Q.
Q. You, sir.
Oh, Guy.
Excellent.
Dolphin.
Kuma. There you go. Ken?
Elena.
The correct answer is Guile. Just say Guile real fast. No? Okay.
Dan. Dr. Dark.
Dr. Dark. Wow, that's unclear. Huh? Excellent. Did you say everybody? Never played it. The correct answer is Guile. Favorite Street Fighter character? I'm sorry, well, it was actually him. But. Rolando? Nice! What about you, sir? You? Q. And you? Excellent. You got a nice view right here. I very apologize. Sorry. Yes. You? Yeah, sure. Why not? Excellent. You too? No, the Link and compatriots. Excellent. One second. There we are. You, sir, in the blue shirt. Excellent. Second. Rolento. Excellent. You there in the back in the... Excellent.
Who has the one on himself?
I'm not answering that question now. What about you guys? Favorite Street Fighter characters?
Hakan.
Sure.
He's from 480.
There we go. Favorite Street Fighter characters? I'm sorry? I don't know who you're referring to, so I'm just going to assume you said Guile. So excellent, good choice.
Finally.
Okay. All right. This is all of that warm up, and now we're just finally starting the panel. This is the real life Street Fighter panel. We're going to be talking about what street fighting is, why we like the games, and what Street Fighter would be like in real life. And it just occurs to me, I didn't annotate my notes, so I'm doing this blind. What would Street Fighter be like in real life compared to what we have now? We actually have a really rich history of this sort of thing in our world. For those of you who can't see, that is two fighters, and one of them is almost throwing a fireball, but obviously without the fireball, or the Hadouken, or the down forward punch. So what would it look like? Would the World Warrior Tournament look like the current mixed martial arts scene, which is dominated by the UFC, Pride, and a few others? Or is there any way we might see something a little bit more recognizable to fans of the franchise? And what sort of thing, what do martial arts tournaments kind of look at? Or what are martial arts tournaments kind of like? So. And so we're going to be talking about what the World Warrior Tournament would be like and how different it would be. How many of you are familiar with the actual story of Street Fighter? Raise your hand. Okay, excellent. You have to be really careful with this, because the actual story depicted in the games is incredibly sparse and doesn't make any sense at all. People, especially hardcore fans, will say it's a really rich story that you see in the games. They are lying. They don't know what's going on. All they know is player A is beating up the computer-controlled player or their friend. So a lot of the stories actually come from the expanded universe. Originally, this was the Malibu comics, which were terrible, then the Tokuma comics, which were awesome, but short-lived and nobody actually read them, so to hell with it. Yes?
I read on crack.com, so one considered source, that they documented the Street Fighter comics by Malibu, and apparently they were so bad that Capcom themselves actually issued an apology, apologizing for how bad the comics were.
Okay. the first real attempt at a unified story was the Street Fighter II animated movie, which was really fantastic, except it really wasn't. Then you had The Dark Days, which was the live-action Street Fighter movie starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, which, despite what everybody says, is really, really fun. Now, I want to be clear here that I said it's really, really fun. I did not say it's really, really good. I did not say it's really, really well done. I didn't necessarily say it's that entertaining. I just said it's really fun. I have nothing more to add to that. After that would come the animated series Street Fighter II V, because that makes sense. And that was the first long-running franchise series. Then you would have Street Fighter Alpha, the movie, which is commonly called Street Fighter Dragon Ball Z. And it's about as good as it sounds, and if it sounds terrible, you're right. If it sounds wonderful, there's something wrong with you. And then would come out the what was the current publisher? IDW? Udon, there we go, thank you, Udon. I've got Transformers on the brain, sorry guys. Udon's currently publishing the comics. Beautiful artwork. Kind of dodgy story. And then came out the second Street Fighter live-action movie, Legend of Chun-Li, which I'm confident nobody in here saw, and even if you did see it, you're not going to admit it, so we're just going to move on. But so you have all of these different depictions of this video game story, but what is actually shown in the story? What do we actually know? When you talk about Street Fighter, you're going to be talking about a primary game, which is Street Fighter II. Everything else is going to be discussed in reference to Street Fighter II, either it leading to Street Fighter II or it following Street Fighter II. So what is the plot of Street Fighter II? Can you stand up please, M. Bison? M. Bison decides he is going to host the World Warrior Tournament. And it's actually, well, thank you very much. It's a lovely costume, by the way. He's going to host the World Warrior Tournament, which takes place in 12 cities around the world. And the fighters will travel to their opponent's city, beat them up, move on, before they will finally come and face M. Bison at his apparently palatial quasi-Buddhist temple home in Thailand. That's really the plot we have to work with. So it's an international tournament. Now right off the bat, that should set off some alarms in your head as to exactly how plausible this is. International law generally kind of frowns upon this sort of thing, and to even get nationals from other countries to come over and to compete in any sport is really, really hard. Getting them over to come and work is really, really hard. Ask Simon Cowell all the trouble he had with his assorted TV shows in the United States, and that was really hard. Ask, the guy who runs the UFC, I just completely blanked on his name. Dana White. Ask Dana White about getting talent from other countries to come to the United States to fight in the UFC. It's hard. So you're confronted with the reality that the World Warrior Tournament is really, really illegal, which is a point that we're going to be coming back to. So, why do people love Street Fighter? That should have been funnier if I stumbled upon it. So why do people love Street Fighter? What is it about this game that is so popular, about this entire story that is so captivating, aside from downright punch? One of the first ones is people love tournaments. It's just a psychological thing. If you come to some of the gaming intellectuals panels, they'll get into the psychology of essentially the math of tournaments. People just like it. They like pitting up a lot of people in an organized fashion and singularly eliminating them up to a crescendo. Because it's one of the basics of game theory. People just like this kind of stuff. The second reason is because of duels. In the West, especially in the United States, we have this long cultural history of the shootout at high noon between the two cowboys. In the East, they have very similar, with the fights between the samurai that they looked upon, which may or may not have actually happened. We're not going to get into that right now. It's a cultural mystique, though, of the two individuals competing against one another. all our sports are based around this very premise, whether it's team sports or individual sports. It is the direct competition between two forces. It's incredibly fascinating. We have it all over in every culture, whether or not it actually happened. We have the mystique in China and the surrounding areas of the idea of you had the Kung Fu schools, that they would determine supremacy through local tournaments. There's actually not that much documented evidence of it happening. There was a long-standing myth that continues to persist to this day, is that you would have the combat ring in the city square, this kind of like raised platform where the two competitors could fight it out. That didn't actually happen. There's very few documented cases. It's like the shootout at the OK Corral. The year that happened, it was 86, I believe, 1886. I could be completely wrong there, but anyway, that was the most violent year in Tombstone, Arizona's history, like ever. Like even into the modern age, they had a higher death rate because of that one shootout than they did the rest of their time. This is supposedly one of the roughest, toughest Western towns. There weren't that many actual shootouts. There weren't that many actual gunfights. But we loved the imagery. We loved the duel concept. Duel meaning D-U-E-L, not D-U. Okay, we're moving on. We also love the debates that these kind of stories bring up, because you don't have the traditional kind of kung fu battle of karate versus karate, kung fu versus kung fu, this kind versus this kind, whatever. You have these interdisciplinary fights, the greatest being the kung fu man versus the boxer. Who would win? How many of you, that's a bad question, let me rephrase that. Okay, here, how about this? The sport of powerlifting, that has 3 lifts, the squat, the deadlift, and the bench press, actually originated from this very kind of thing. It wasn't originally an individual sport. These were the 3 weightlifting lifts every sport did. They were the 3 central points where you could directly compete. That a basketball player, a football player, a baseball player, a track and field person, all of them could measure up, because these were the 3 things everybody did. It was the commonality. So these kind of things have persisted throughout our entire culture. They're very, very popular. I don't know why that's in there. It's like, damn good costume, though. I mean, seriously. Seriously, look at that. That's wonderful. I think, oh yeah, so is Vegas. Oh, I got that. Okay, so. I feel compelled to bring up this very quick issue. I won't hark on it because it's a real really? Okay. Because it's kind of a downer, but it does need to be brought up. How many of you watch NCIS? Okay, don't lie. Come on, don't pretend. Like 20 more of you need to raise your hands. Don't. Okay. There was a wonderful episode where McGee, I think, makes some comment about how underground fighting videos are a wonderful moneymaker. They're really, really not. We love street fighting as a narrative tool. They're very popular in movies, very popular in video games, very popular in TV shows. They are not very popular in real life. In fact, they're incredibly unpopular because they confront us with the reality that violence is terrifying and horrible. It's really, really unsettling to actually watch a real fight. If you truly want to have your stomach churned, Google, or YouTube, real life street fight, bum fights, that kind of stuff. It's very unsettling. And if you can watch it and you're not unsettled, and I'm not being sarcastic, you really need to talk to somebody. Because this stuff goes against civilization, our humanity, to watch people be hurt like this. Street fights are really, really ugly. They're not demonstrations of skill, and they're really unsettling. Jackie Chan famously quoted once, "I love action, but I hate violence." Real-world street fights are incredibly violent, and they're not fun to watch. I just want to get that out of the way. We'll stop from there. In the 1960s, moving and into the 1960s, into the very early 1980s, the United States had a really rich tradition of martial arts tournaments. We had a lot of them, and they were really, really good. This is where Bruce Lee would introduce Jeet Kune Do. This is where Chuck Norris would introduce how badass and amazing he was. And all sarcasm aside, I mean, everybody's heard the Chuck Norris jokes and everything else. He won something like 80 martial arts tournaments in a year. When you stop and do the math, that's more than not cripple one another. He earned some of the acclaim he has. But then in the 1960s, you had the rise of full contact karate, which was similar to what you would see in Japan, China, Korea, and other nations in the Orient. No protective gear. It was just kind of, again, it was kind of a gentleman's agreement that you hit hard, just not too hard. Well, this would eventually evolve into, they would emphasize speed and speed and speed, and they would emphasize points. Some people didn't like this. They said, you know, it's fine, it's fun, but it's really not giving us what we want. You see the rise of superstars like Bill Superfoot Wallace, one of the greatest karate competitors of all time. He's up there with Chuck Norris, he's up there with a lot of the modern MMA stars with his accomplishments. He was amazing, phenomenal, incredible. And he was on the cusp of the transition from full contact karate to kickboxing, Western kickboxing, which was, we're going to take karate, we're going to take taekwondo, we're going to take sudo, these kind of martial arts, and we're going to mix them with boxing. We're going to have protective gloves, sometimes even boxing gloves. We're going to have full contact for the most part. This is what the face of modern martial arts would be going into the 80s, is going to be kickboxing. This would also allow for a little bit of infusion from Muay Thai, from Thai kickboxing. Then came the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The Ultimate Fighting Championship would be an attempt to take the martial art tournaments in South America and to a little bit in Japan and bring them to the United States. This would be 92, I believe. 91, 92?
92.
92, okay. This is going to be the closest we're ever going to get to real fighting in a tournament-style situation. It was a 16-man single elimination tournament, the original UFC. And it was rough. There's no two ways about it. It was a brutal wake-up call to the martial arts community because the karate guys got their butts whipped. The Kung Fu wasn't even represented. I don't think Taekwondo was represented. We saw size mattered more than you think, but not as much as you might expect. It introduced us to the ground game. It introduced us to wrestling, to grappling. And it also introduced us to a lot of the modern superstars that we know today, the Gracie family, Ken Shamrock, others. The problem is that as this would go along, this would evolve from a tournament to a sport. We're going to talk about the difference there in a minute. But what you see now in the modern UFC and the modern MMA scene is not what it started out as. Compare UFC 150 to UFC 1. Very different. The original UFC was a lot uglier. There were literally 3 rules. There was no biting, no eye gouging, and no groin shots. Those were the only rules. There were no other rules. There were no weight classes, there was no time limit, nothing. Okay. So what's the difference between a sport and a tournament? A wonderful question. I am going to consult my notes. You have to consider, in a sport, you're going to consider who do people want to see versus who qualified, which is what you see in a tournament. How many of you are followed the BCS college football? There was wow, nobody raised their hand. Okay, there was a big kerfuffle just recently. There was a big kerfuffle recently where they changed the BCS rules. BCS being Bowl Championship Series. They changed the rules so that they could allow some of the smaller colleges to get in. And a college called Northern Illinois got into the BCS championship, and everybody went crazy saying, nobody wants to see these people, nobody's going to pay money, Nobody wants to see the tickets. And this is kind of at the cusp of the issue of a sport versus a tournament. A tournament doesn't matter if people want to see the fight, or the match. What matters is who qualified. A sport is going to consider that. You see this in the controversies over the UFC, whether or not people will decide who's going to have the actual fight, because there's a negotiation, there's a debate. I'm not going to fight this person, and that's kind of the end of it. Champions, a lot of times, can pick and choose who they want to fight in tournaments. And this is very controversial. There's no definitive way to determine #1 contendership a lot of the times. Another issue is ongoing ranking versus a finalized thing. With the original UFC, when you won the UFC, boom, you won the UFC, yay! When UFC 2 came around, that meant nothing. You went back to the line with everybody else, and it was another 16 single-man elimination tournament. With a sport, you're going to have an ongoing matter. Like in boxing, basketball, football, your ranking the previous year affects your ranking the next year. And then there's also non-title matches versus elimination matches, blah, 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 nobody cares. Moving on. So what do modern tournaments look like? Modern martial arts tournaments? Quite simply, there's not that much fighting in them. You're going to get a unified score based off of multiple disciplines. You're going to have your sparring matches, but they're rarely fighting. They're usually going to be point sparring. They're usually going to have kind of the chest area, kind of the rules from the Karate Kid that all of you know whether you want to admit it or not. But you're also going to have forms competition. You're going to have self-defense competitions. They're really, really elaborate. Now this depends on the style. If it's traditional karate, it's going to be a lot more hardcore than modern taekwondo. But you're going to have the International Taekwondo Federation set of rules versus the World Taekwondo Federation set of rules. And if you start getting into some of the crazy stuff like Jeet Kune Do or Kaje Kimbo, your ass is on your own. The one exception that we still have, the one thing between like the UFC and like bum fights under the, highway bridge, are tough man competitions. This is the closest thing you would have to the World Warrior Tournament. These things are very rare because they're inevitably highly illegal. On the rare cases that they actually happen, the purses are incredibly small. Seriously, this is the top purse. Prize money is up to, not guaranteed, up to, you might make $12,000 for the ultimate winner. Who in their right mind is going to fly from another continent for that kind of money? Seriously, even if you're a traveling monk who just wants to prove that his style of karate is really that badass, you're not going to come all the way for $12,000. No, that's barely going to cover your travel expenses. Nothing to say about your medical expenses. Because even if you win the fight, you're still going to get hurt. You're still going to get beat up. So, what this is ultimately coming up to is that we have this wonderful mythos of the lone wolf who's going to come out of nowhere and prove themselves. With the original UFC, up through about like UFC 30 or 40, you still had the chance of just walking in the door and getting into the octagon. That's where Tito Ortiz, one of the big names in the UFC, got started. Was they needed an alternate, they needed somebody for a fight, and almost literally just said, "Hey you!" And that's how Tito Ortiz's career got started. Admittedly, he was a training partner for one of the other fighters. There's more to it than that, but the original UFC, there was a mystique about it, and it continues to persist to this day, that you can just kind of like show up and demonstrate your skills. That was never entirely true, and it's less true now. Believe it or not, this is actually a really good thing, because there are a few diamonds in the rough. There are a few people out there, men and women, who have the skills to just completely excel at these various sports, at tough men competitions, at MMA fights, whatever. But they completely pale in the numbers of hundreds of morons who would want to walk into an octagon and get seriously, seriously hurt. Okay, I said I was going to harp on that, so I'm not going to harp on it. So, what would the World Warrior Tournament look like today? I love this picture. Moving on. For one, there would be international coverage. NBC would want in on it, ABC, CBS, ESPN, Fox. Oh yeah, ESPN would be all over this, especially ESPN 8, the Ocho. I love that movie so much. Seriously, sometimes I'll just completely skip by the entire first 2 acts and just get to Cotton and Pepper. Oh yeah, Lord, that's wonderful. There would be international coverage. It'd be almost impossible to keep the BBC out, to keep Al Jazeera out, especially in international competition. They'd be all over this. There would be news cameras everywhere. And they'd be following not just the fights, but the fighters. Another thing is there'd be merchandise. Do not lie and tell me if there was a real Ryu or a real Bison or a real Ken, you would not want a plushie. Don't pretend. You know it's true. And some of you creeps would want a plushie Chun-Li. Don't lie. Go ahead and own up to it. You know it's true. Now, Ryu, the badass, look at his uniform for a second. He's in kind of a bastardized, traditional karate style. Actually, that might be a European style. That's interesting. Anyway, moving on, sorry. It actually has to do with the length of the jacket, but not beside the point. So, what color is it? This is not rhetorical. White, okay. Do you see any advertisements on it? No. Exactly. In real life, for you, would look like this. Let's see what we've got here. We've got Nextel. We've got Wrangler jeans. We've got Champion Auto Parts. We have Goodyear Auto Parts. We have Snap-on Auto Parts. We have Vendadas, which I'm sure sounds good. We have Toyota Chevy. Lord, I apologize for that. Please forgive me. And if his ass turned around, you'd see even more. This is George St. Pierre's actual fight shorts. Wow. Okay, these are the shorts that he wore to a fight. If you don't know who George St. Pierre is, I couldn't explain it. Yeah, whatever.
Language.
Full Contact Fighter is a commercial manufacturer of mostly clothes. GSP MMA is his personal website where he sells his own stuff. Spike, I'm not sure what that is, but that's definitely commercial. Amped Mobile, a cell phone company, is advertising right next to it. I'm like going to leave that alone. This is what the fighters would look like. There would be, if you've ever seen an MMA event, you've ever seen the UFC, the fighter comes in and starts doing his little dance because he looks like he has to go to the bathroom. And what does his goon squad do behind him? They roll out this giant bed sheet full of merchandise logos of people that gave him $1,000, $100, whatever, to sell his stuff by basically saying, yes, I eat at Burger King. And that's going to happen. Oh, okay. Another issue is also that if there was a Real World Warrior tournament and you wanted to go see it, you would go and you would watch the first rounds and they'd be fun. They'd be throwing fireballs and breathing fires and sonic booms and flash kicks and all of that fun stuff. And then the second round would happen. And then we screwed the hell up. The first UFC 123 would almost assuredly be the most interesting. Maybe the second round of battles would be kind of fun, but by the time you got to the actual end of the tournament, the two fighters would be so messed up from the previous fights, it wouldn't even be entertaining.
Correct.
Okay, so, do we have any questions so far? Anything? Yes, you there in the back with apparently half a face for some reason.
Who's the green?
What?
Who's the green guy?
Ken.
Lake.
Because those like turnovers. Because really, if that's what you're asking about with this picture,
let's be fair. They're different color palettes.
Yeah, it's different palette swaps. Okay. Do we have any other questions so far?
How did Blonde get penmanship?
Do we have any questions? Okay. No. Good. All right. So, what? Yes.
The one thing when you're talking about where each of the fighters go to their opponent's home nations, who's the one doing that all? Because if they can't all do it at the same time, and when you're playing the game, only one person ever does it.
It's a wonderful point. No, and based on the game, the impression in the original Street Fighter II, the impression that you are getting is these are the fighters that basically you're getting to see, but that it's originally 8, so and it's I think
Yeah,
you
like
only
this.
fight 6 of them. So that's what,
7.
128-man elimination tournament. So there's actually 128 fighters who are traveling and either fighting from home or going to somebody's place, and you're just not seeing that bracket in the tournament.
So does that explain those 2 minutes at the start and the introduction?
That's out of context, going to the developers. Those were actual, or the guy in the white t-shirt was actually supposed to be one of the guys from the original Street Fighter.
Joe.
Yeah, Joe, I think so.
The other guy's Mike?
No, it wasn't Joe. Who was the other American? Not,
Mike.
I guess it was Joe. Yeah, because it was Mike. Because it was originally Mike Bison, and it just gets really complicated from there.
As a child, I've never
Really,
understood
really,
that.
the Japanese names make a lot more sense. I mean, seriously. Because I would so much rather fight a boxer named Mike Bison than a boxer named Balrog, because that's just weird. Okay. So, what would the core 8 fighters from Street Fighter II look like in real life? We actually have some really good parallels in the real world. Now, we're going to have to take some allowances here that we're going to try to stick to MMA competition and people from the individual nations. But there are going to be a lot of, take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Also, no magic, no throwing fireballs, no, twice your height leaping abilities. But let's start with arguably the main character in the Street Fighter franchise, Ryu. That is Lyoto Machida. He is a real MMA fighter with an above average good fight record. He actually comes from and is very proud of his karate background. He's a really good fighter. He's a lot of fun to watch because he's very different from the usual equation. The usual MMA equation is either a Muay Thai background or a boxing background fused with a jiu-jitsu background or wrestling. Having somebody come from a karate background really throws everything out. I don't think he has any fights scheduled in the near future. I'm not aware of him having any. He may be kind of on his way out. Most MMA fighters have about maybe 20 fights total in their career, about half of which will be spent in the UFC. And outside of the UFC, you're going to be hard-pressed to get to see too much out of them. Yes, sir, you got a question?
He actually is trained in sumo as well.
Weird.
Yeah, this is wrestling
Yeah.
background.
That's really kind of cool.
It's awesome.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, sumo's more than just the big fat guys. If you know much about grappling, sumo actually has a lot in common with Greco-Roman wrestling, which is basically no takedowns beneath the waist, so it's all upper body stuff. And it's actually really applicable in MMA. So this would probably be a lot what Ryu would look like. So what would his palette swap Ken look like? And the answer actually is GSP, George St. Pierre, possibly one of the greatest living fighters. GSP, the difference is GSP was born poor and has generally lived poor. GSP's father taught him Shotokan, starting at about like 12 or something, and he grew up with karate, so he's got a karate background as well. He's graduated to Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and all that fun stuff, but his karate background stands through. This is probably what Ken would look like, more or less, probably even with the goofy smile.
Especially
So
with the
next
goofy
up,
smile.
what would Guile look like? He's one of the big questions. There's been a lot of talk about would the military do in MMA? Yes, sir.
A quick note, for the record, I'm in the military. Gal's haircut is totally out of place.
Yeah. So was having a street fight on the tarmac right in front of the jet.
Another good point.
Yeah. So what would Guile look like? There are issues with the MMA. There was one of the knockoffs of Deadliest Warrior, for those of you who know what that TV show was. There was a knockoff where they trained at the McMap Academy. For those of you who don't know, it's the Marine Corps martial arts program, which is really amazing. And one of their head instructors said, if you put me in a fight with an MMA fighter, he is probably, in the octagon, he's probably going to win. If you put me in a fight with an MMA fighter on the street, I'm certainly going to kill him. So you have, and that's not blind bragging, it's what you're trained in. Military fighters are not trained for the MMA. They're not trained for a one-on-one fight. They are trained for a life or death situation where their environment is a weapon to be used against them and for them. It's also a teamwork issue, but that gets more complicated. But just on a rote, what would Guile look like? And the answer is most likely Randy Couture. He has one of the strongest military backgrounds of any currently active or recently active MMA fighter. He's a big guy. He's physically very strong, but apparently nobody explained inertia to him, so he's also really agile. And seriously, are you really going to tell that man like how physics works and him having to refute you? No. If this man has a disagreement with you, I'm just going to say this right now. If he disagrees with you, maybe ketchup is better than mustard. Maybe Vanilla Ice is a good rapper. You just need to own up to it. There are some people that if they disagree with you, you just need to, go on. So what would Chun-Li look like? This is something that was really interesting. There actually is a martial art in the MMA community that comes from China. It's called Sanshu. No, I'm mispronouncing that wrong. I know. It's okay. There are women's division Shanshu fighters, and it's really interesting. Fortunately, I couldn't find pictures of them until I came across this woman. I don't even know who she is. I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce her name. This is the World Championship Shanshu fighter for 2011. Her name is Kajia Azapur. I know I'm mispronouncing that, and I apologize to her and everybody who knows her real name. Gold medalist in the 60 kilogram weight division, Sanshu fighter. This is the kind of background you would have Chun-Li coming from. She's going to be coming from the women's division, and it's very unlikely she's going to be competing against the men's. Any questions so far? Yes?
I don't suppose there's going to be likely she's also going to have a police background?
That goes back to kind of like the military thing with Guile. That's not really going to have too much bearing on her fight experience, because most police schools, and I'm only speaking from my experience with the U.S., I don't know about other nations, but in the U.S., many police academies have martial arts programs and have fighting programs, and the students are encouraged to expand outside of that, but the actual core curriculum is very, very limited.
Okay.
So I don't know that would come into play too terribly much. Next up, another controversial figure is E Honda. What would E Honda be like in the World Warrior Tournament in the real life? What is this person going to be? Because this is silly. Seriously, a sumo fighter? Well, turns out there actually has been one. The championship sumo fighter who has had several MMA matches, and I just want to be clear, he's got his ass handed to him on multiple occasions. But the fact is, there is a precedent for it. And as we were talking about with Machida, sumo, in theory, is actually quite applicable in an MMA-style thing. An MMA-style match. Everybody on board? Okay, fantastic. Now we come to another controversial figure. I had a hard time trying to figure out how I was going to do this. How would you represent the Russian icon Zangief? So I looked to the MMA. I really wanted to look to pro wrestling, but that just wouldn't be fair. So I looked to the MMA, and there's actually very few Russian fighters who have done well. And the best example is Andrei Arlovsky. I'm sorry?
No, he's good.
Oh, okay. He's got fangs. I'm not arguing with him. No, I'm afraid he'd eat me. Andrei Arlovsky kind of bucks the pattern, but it kind of like Couture with a military background. Arlovsky has a CCS, I think, background. He has a military background in Russia. Yes, you have your hand up?
How can,
That's okay, you can make a pick.
how can the Russian icon be anyone other than people in the He also has background in judo and
That is a wonderful question, and I don't know how that completely slipped through my research. I'm quite embarrassed now. That's a good, excellent point. I wish I had a picture of him instead. So we're just going to pretend that's his picture, and I'm going to say, there you go. And everybody's going to applaud. Thank you. You're completely and totally right. You're totally right. So I'm going to move on quickly. Dalstein. All right, so let's go ahead and get a couple things out of the way right now. So, Dalstein does yoga. Okay. All right. That's his martial art. Okay, sure. We're going to forget the stretch Armstrong factor. We're going to forget the ability to breathe fire. We're certainly going to forget the teleporting. How could this possibly happen? And the answer is actually really surprising, because rather than be an outlier with his possible presence, it actually makes the most sense, because almost every martial art on earth owes its lineage back to India. Kung Fu, the Chinese Kung Fu that began most of the martial tradition in Asia, that would influence the martial arts across most of the world at some point in history, traced back to a martial art called Kalari Hayatu. And I know I'm mispronouncing that as well. What is that? Well, quite frankly, it's Indian Kung Fu. And it is heavily, heavily related to yoga. There is a huge carryover, crossover as far as principles and techniques. So when you talk about Dalsim, you're not necessarily talking about yoga, you're talking about a martial tradition that is longer and more esteemed than Kung Fu itself. You're talking about a martial tradition that probably predates the Shaolin Temple by at least 500 years. You're talking about a martial art tradition that encompasses striking, grappling, acrobatics, conditioning, and every weapon you can possibly fathom. So suddenly Dalsim isn't some crazy outlier. Dalsim is coming to reclaim the throne his martial art once held. Everybody going along with that? Okay, good. Yes. Yes, you had a question?
So how did it lose its throne?
Partially, and I'm not going to exaggerate, partially because it's hard to pronounce. I mean, plain and simple.
Okay.
Kung Fu, easy to pronounce, even for people who don't speak the language. Because Kung Fu has a greater, how can I put this, PR firm behind it. It's kind of like the katana. There's a lot of wonderful weapons in the Japanese arsenal, but the katana gets the attention. There's a lot of wonderful martial arts that came out of mainland Asia. Kung Fu got the attention. There's a lot of speculation about that. I mean, that's a very good question, but that gets into the history of international relations between India and the rest of the world, specifically after it became a colony under Britain. That's another matter. It's an excellent question, though. I'm just not going to go into it. I apologize. If you ask me afterwards, we can go into it some. And finally, the last of the 8, Blanca. Capoeira. An esteemed martial art coming out of Brazil that actually began from Brazilian slaves who were forbidden to practice their African martial arts. And so they allegedly, there's some discussion about this, they allegedly hid it inside their traditional dancing. Capoeira is a very respected martial art as a conditioning exercise, and it has made an impact on the MMA world. Its actual applicability is still highly debated. It's kind of like the jump kick. It's one of those things that if you can land it, you win. That's a big if. This is closer to what Blanca would look like. I don't understand why he got hit with sudden onset fetal alcohol syndrome. This is kind of what Blanca would be showing up. If you look at his if you look at his actual character art of his moves, not how they actually play, but what they are supposedly illustrating, especially if you look at Street Fighter Alpha 3 and then into Street Fighter 3, they do try to capture the capoeira aspect of the acrobatics, of the fluid circular motions. But yeah, okay, so any questions? Yes, sir?
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I can't help but point out that Numish is Brazilian, and there's no shortage of naturalized Japanese mixed martial arts.
I will actually one-up you better. Do you know that Brazil has the highest population of Japanese outside of Japan itself? Prior to, about World War I, but definitely prior to World War II, you saw a mass exodus from Japan all throughout the world. This is how Gracie Jiu-Jitsu would get started. The founder of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was friends with a guy sent to basically spread judo to the world.
Oh, I know this.
And so there's a huge, rich martial tradition in Brazil of the Japanese arts, of Jiu-Jitsu, of karate, of all of these things. This is why, for those of you who weren't here earlier when we were completely shooting the breeze, we were talking about Sean a little earlier. Sean is a character from Street Fighter 3 who is really, really excellent for a couple of reasons. One, he is a karate fighter from Brazil. Like you were pointing out, there's actually a rich tradition of karate in Brazil. Excellent, solid styles of karate. But his character, his moves include a really aggressive double leg takedown that you don't find in karate, that is indicative of the jiu-jitsu tradition in Brazil. He also has 2 or 3 really acrobatic kicks and that fling his ass across the screen coming from capoeira. So with this one character of Sean, they have encapsulated 3 martial influences. It's brilliant. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and it doesn't make sense why he's not more popular, but he's not, because he's like Dan, only cool and good. Plus he hits you in the face with a basketball. That's just mean. Yes?
And he was stupidly overpowered in Second Impact.
Yeah, then we start getting into the revamps and differences from one to the other. But,
Same,
okay.
man.
All right, so we talked about how the World Warrior Tournament would look like. There's probably not going to be a lot of international travel. You might go to a particular place, but you're not... Is your hand up? I can't tell.
Yes.
Oh, yes, okay.
Question.
Yo, answer.
Would Mega be able to actually get his claw past anything?
I'm not even going to bother answering that question. Okay, so we kind of talked about what the World Warrior Tournament would look like in real life. It might be, you might have people from all over the world going to it, which would be really complex, but it could conceivably happen, but it would be in one centralized location. And you would have the corporate sponsorship, you would have the merchandising, you would have the international coverage, all of that fun stuff. What the fighters might look like, the particular 8 from the original core Street Fighter II. Who would win? Who is the most likely to win the World Warrior Tournament if we set it in the real world using these examples? Who is the likeliest to win? Now again, remember, no fireballs, no Hadoukens, no dragon punches, no flash kicks. Who is the most likeliest to win? This is purely my professional informed opinion, but I would postulate the winner would be Zangief. The UFC has proven that while it is possible for a smaller person to overpower a larger person with greater skill, large size is still a huge determining factor in the outcome of a fight. In that you can get to a large size where only if you have a stupid gap in skill potential is the outcome not going to be going to go to the size. Zangief is huge. Let me remind you about his character. The man wrestles bears for fun. In Siberia.
Just like that.
In panties. This is Zangief. He comes from a martial background that has proven itself in the real world, who has proven itself in the mixed martial arts world. He is huge, he has incredible grappling skills, and he wrestles bears. You were asking about Vega's claw. He wrestles bears. Yes, sir, you in the back.
He came up with a spinning collar driver while wrestling a bear and he got caught in a tornado.
I rest my case. He saw a tornado, a giant spinning embodiment of God's anger, and said, I think I can top that. And decided with, you know what it doesn't have enough of? My knuckles. So yeah, my money's on his ass. Okay, so if Zangief is the most likely to win, who might be the most likely to pull out an upset? Who might come from out of nowhere to pull off an amazing achievement? And my money would go on Blanca.
Yeah.
Capoeira, like I was saying earlier, has proven to be an incredibly unpredictable, crazy, oh my lord, I did not just see that type of thing in the martial arts, and especially in the MMA. In the lower ranks and the middle ranks, you can go online, look up for GIFs and videos of capoeira kicks in the MMA, and they are beautiful. You've ever wanted to see somebody do a double flip and knock somebody out with both feet? It's happened, and it was real. It wasn't doctored. It wasn't something out of a Hollywood movie. It was real, and it is so pretty. In a lot of ways, that's why the mid-rank fights in the MMA community, not the UFC, but beneath it, can be so wonderful because you get crazy. Okay, not that crazy. But you get crazy things like that happening. Okay, so do we have any questions? Anything? Yes, hey.
Who's most likely to lose, come in last place?
Come in last place? Chun-Li. And the reason isn't just because that she's physically the smallest despite her thighs. The reason is because her background isn't Kung Fu, which is very nebulous and open. Her background certainly isn't Sanshu, like I was kind of asserting. Her background is in Wushu. Wushu is an incredibly acrobatic, very athletic, and hard martial art. I'm not knocking it at all, but it is not combat proven in one-on-one competitions. And so it'd be like a Taekwondo black belt with no other martial art training, just Taekwondo, competing in the UFC. He'd get destroyed. I mean, just plain and simple. I would love to see otherwise, but it's not likely to happen. Even Cammy would put up a better defense because of her military background, aside from, but the size disadvantages would be too great. You had a question, sir?
If it was an elimination style tournament, wouldn't Capoeira start to drop the more and more people he faced?
Oh yeah, no, he wouldn't make it to the end, most likely. He would win one, maybe two fights, and somebody would take him down. But the point is that it would be so unpredictable. Unlike most everybody else, on a straight one-on-one matchup, Zangief would kind of win pretty much across the board. The thing is with Blanca is the unpredictability factor just could not be taken into account. There's just no way you could unequivocally say, no, he's going to lose in this fight, because feet. Yes?
Why did you focus on the original 8 and not the expanded cast, if you will?
Because it's too long.
Okay.
Because everybody gets in, because if you start talking about like Chun-Li and Fei Long and others, and you start, especially if you start getting to outside of the other games like Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 3 and others.
Well, I mean,
you can start, but the problem is Chun-Li's the best example. Which Chun-Li are you going to talk about? Because she's a very different character from Super Street Fighter 2 versus Street Fighter Alpha. And are you going to talk about the character she's presented to be or the character she is within the narrative? And it gets really complex there. Yes?
well, even so, I mean, within specifically the Street Fighter 2 aspect, where there was the original 8, and then there were the 4 extras, T-Hog, DJ, K-Long, etc.
Right. What about them?
Does does it still go back with the panel would have been, everything would have been too long to explain?
It just gets really complex. T-Hawk's not really that well known. Fei Long is Bruce Lee. They can dress him up however they want, but he's Bruce Lee. DJ would be my odds-on favorite for the next most likely to win after Zangief. And Cammy, kind of like Chun-Li, basically just, she would be incredibly unlikely to be in the tournament because it almost certainly wouldn't be intergender. And if it was, she would get demolished just by sheer body weight. I mean, a 100-pound weight disadvantage is almost insurmountable with professional fighters. And she'd be facing that almost certainly. There was, yes sir?
Would Bloodsport, the movie,
No.
be a comparison?
No, because nothing about that was real. Not one single thing.
Was this all before that one?
Say again?
Did it lend from Street Fighter, the video game story, or did they try and rehash it out?
What are you talking about? Bloodsport?
Yeah.
No, Bloodsport was completely made up by Frank Dukes because he's a horrible liar. No, he is. There's no question about it. No, like when every single branch of the military says we have no idea who he is and he never served, that should send up some, and when he, made up his own martial arts, made up records that nobody documented. No, you have to start calling it. No, Frank Dukes made up everything, flat out. I mean, if he's here right now, I don't really want to argue with him about it.
But the aspect of the characters all coming together for a tournament.
No, because that's been part of the mythos of the martial arts for years. I mean, that kind of tradition, again, goes back to the shootout tournaments of the West, goes back to the martial arts tournaments. Bruce Lee did it with Enter the Dragon. That would be the prototype. But, yeah, there was another question? Yes, sir.
So what about, I mean, or Balrog,
And by something, whatever.
pure boxing probably won't really work in MMA.
No. They did have an exhibition match between a pure boxer against Couture, and the boxer, I don't think it lasted a minute.
But Sagat would probably have a decent shot.
Guy?
Sagat.
Sagat? Oh yeah, no, Sagat. Yeah, especially considering the fact that he's, 9'30". And just the fact that he's got, like a heart replacement scar across his chest, that's intimidating. There's just no way around that.
I'll fight him. Give up.
But, I mean, yeah, no, Sagat would probably pull out pretty well, especially if he has a more expanded martial arts background. Because he was such a purist, it's almost a foregone conclusion he would have a background in Krabi Krabong and other Thai arts in addition to Muay Thai. So no, Sagat would probably do very well. Say again? You had a question, sir?
Outside of the fireballs, are there any super moves in the game that...
The flash kick.
Okay.
Flash kick is very possible. You can get a video of guys. It's more of a capoeira kick than, but you can't pull off a move like that, and it's a 1 in a billion shot, but it can work.
But that 1 in a billion is good.
Oh yeah, no, you'll never have to pay for drinks at a bar again. If I can you can just show it to people. Oh yeah. There's a question back here. Yes, sir.
You may have already touched on this, talking about Bloodsport, but who would be the real-life analog for Dan?
Refresh my memory. Who was Dan in Bloodsport?
No.
Oh, that guy that that he trains by breaking bricks with his head every day, even though you never see bricks at his house. He lifts for tone, but he lifts like 400 pounds. Because he goes to the gym, but it's not the one by your house that you see him at. He'd be that guy.
He's in the shop.
But yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Do you think there's be any real-world parallel for people allowing these fighters to just eat the crap out of their cars or let them fight?
Yes. All sorts of charity stuff. No, there was a charity event in England where they invited like 3 karate black belts. And it's like, here's a house, break it. And like over the course of about 6 hours, they went through and broke every brick, every board of wood, everything in the house. In fact, there's a TV show that's like that. Say again? Yeah, Human Wrecking Ball. Okay. Yes, sir.
I mean, there's something at MAGFest here. You can flip over a table.
Yes, and it was supposed to be tomorrow, and I was going to compete in it, and I didn't get the chance to, and I'm really pissed about that. Yo. All right, I have time for 2 more questions, and I got to close up. So 2 more questions. Who's got some? Yes. Ow.
Something like this next year for Marvel vs. Capcom?
No. I'll explain why. Because there's one answer for all of that, and it's 2 words, and it is Hulk. And it's Smash. I was going to leave it at that. Okay, 1 more question. Okay, fair enough. Fantastic. Guys, thank you very much for coming here. My name is Robert B. Aldrich. I have a website, teachthesky.com. It is currently inactive, but I promise it is still live. You're welcome to go there and do nothing because there's not much there to do at the moment. I have a new book coming out this June called Rest for the Wicked. It is by Haven Publishing. It should be out June 21st. But please go forth, enjoy the rest of MAGFest. And if you enjoyed my panels, please let the MAGFest staff know so I can come back next year. Thank you so much, guys.